I'm not going to define my words here, but I'm going to use the word spirituality. I just have an introduction to make, so I don't have time to define these words. Here, I'm going to mention the word spirituality, but the kinds of people I'm going to mention have nothing to do with ritualistic religion. So many people have found reason and woke up to the concept of liberty after reading the works of Ayn Rand, Murray Rothbard, Ludwig von Mises. My journey has been very different. I got to know about Ayn Rand much later in my life, in my late 20s. But I knew the concept of liberty. People ask me when I became a libertarian. I have always been a libertarian. I found the concept of liberty from what are known as spiritual teachers. And some of these names you might know. Among them are Osho, J. Krishnamurti, and S.K. Goenka. And S.K. Goenka runs, he passed away last year, but he runs what is called Vipassana meditation, and I have done it for a very long time. Now, expanding on this subject, our next speaker, Anat van Eeden, will talk about the true foundation of liberty. Please give a warm welcome to Anat van Eeden.
Thank you. On the night between Tuesday and Wednesday last week, I woke up at 1 a.m. My mind decided that I'm not ready to give this talk, perceived that as a threat to my well-being, and reacted by releasing stress hormones to wake me up. Even though I have enough mindfulness training to annoy my friends and relatives, at 1 a.m. biology trumps mindfulness. By the time I woke up, the stress hormones were coursing through my system, getting me ready to choose a course of action from the very limited options of fight, flight, or freeze. I took a mental inventory of what the next day had in store, fully realized that I would now be completely useless for my early morning workout, wished things were different, but since I can't reason with biochemistry, I was awake, and there was no way I could go back to sleep. The thing is, there was no real threat to my well-being. There was only the psychological risk of standing in front of people and talking. A much more useful thing my mind could have done in theory was to make sure I got 8 hours of sleep so I could wake up fresh on Wednesday morning and then write a snappy, riveting talk for you. But that's not how minds work. Our brains are really just ancient survival machines, and we're stuck with them. We are puppets of our biology. But we are able to hit the reset button once we realize biology took over. We still have to allow the biology to happen and to wear itself out. But thankfully, hormones have a surprisingly short half-life. So what we can do is interrupt the hormonal cascade before it creates too much damage through reactive behavior. We do that by waking up, and this time figuratively, out of the mind story into the reality that is here. And then we choose. We choose a course of action that would serve us, because most of the time there is no threat. What I did then at 1 a.m. is get up. I may have said a bad word, got down to my desk and worked in relative darkness so I don't wake up too much. And then once the adrenaline wore off, I went back to bed. I really would have preferred a good night's sleep, but that wasn't what my brain was offering, and I had limited choices. The early reptilian part of our brain is able to take control of our bodies and our rational minds for our survival benefit. Our brains are threat assessment machines that scan for differences because for much of our species' existence, different and change meant death. There was a very narrow set of parameters we had to meet to be accepted by our tribe, and we had to be on alert, sometimes simply so we don't get eaten. Fortunately, we evolved, but our minds retain their early structures, and we react to traffic, business, and our partners as if they're going to kill us. And that is extremely unhelpful. We now fight for psychic survival with the same intensity we did for physical survival. We are designed to move towards things that bring pleasure and away from things that bring pain. But in our modern world, pleasure is so easily accessible that we are now stuck in a constant consumption binge for the next dopamine hit. And if that wasn't bad enough, neuroscience research was able to show that our minds actually decide our actions before we have a chance to be aware that we're even making a choice. The good news is that there is a way out. With training, we can pause between the biological triggers and then choose a reaction that would serve us better. Sometimes we can't pause, just like I couldn't choose not to wake up. That's good. When you need to react to a real threat, you don't want to pause. You want to duck, pull away, run, or get really, really angry. When we recognize later that we should have paused, that's progress too. It means we noticed there was an alternate choice we could have made, but didn't. With practice, the choice to pause gets made more and more regularly, and we get to choose the way out, to choose the way our future unfolds. We don't have to be slaves to our biology. It doesn't mean that we change our personality. We are born with our unique combination of body and mind. We just become more skilled at using what we have. And I have a story for you. Mohini was a regal white tiger who lived for many years at the Washington, D.C. National Zoo. For most of those years, her home was in the old lion house. It was a typical 12 by 12 foot cage with iron bars and a cement floor. Mohini spent her days pacing restlessly back and forth in her cramped quarters. Eventually, biologists and staff worked together to create a natural habitat for her. Covering several acres, it had hills, trees, a pond, and a variety of vegetation. With excitement and anticipation, they released Mohini into her new and expansive environment, but by then it was too late. The tiger immediately sought refuge in a corner of the compound, where she lived for the rest of her life. She paced and paced in that corner until an area 12 by 12 feet was worn bare of grass. The tiger's story spoke to me because it so clearly shows that there is so much more potential freedom for each of us than what we're willing to claim. The reason we don't live in freedom is not just because of something external, especially not here in Canada. The reason we're not free is first and foremost because of self-imposed limitations, which are unconscious and invisible. Think of them as mental cages. So while it's so easy for me to spot where another person is stuck, when it comes to my own misconceptions, I'm completely blind. The wake-up call, the way to know that I am stuck, was shown to be by my meditation teacher, Eeden-he, who said it this way: when there is craving and aversion, it becomes so clear. The mind becomes agitated. Only he said it in a Burmese accent, so it was much more compelling. Craving is the move towards pleasure, and aversion is the move away from pain. So now I know. When my mind becomes agitated, when my focus becomes narrowed, when I become obsessed with things being in a certain way, as I do over and over again, I know I've bumped into my cage. The first step to freedom then is this: stop, get quiet, and ask two questions. Why am I doing what I'm doing? And what am I feeling? When you start asking why, you realize that sometimes the reason is just because you're doing it. And guess what? As long as you don't hurt someone else, you can stop. You're an adult, and you don't need permission. Ellen Goodman said that normal is getting dressed in clothes that you buy for work and driving through traffic in a car that you're still paying for in order to get to the job you need to pay for the clothes and the car and the house that you leave vacant all day so you can afford to live in it. What is driving us? Once our needs for food, shelter, and warmth are met, there are three major underlying forces that drive human behavior: the fear of death, the drive to procreate, and the need for belonging, the need to be seen as we are, and for our lives to have meaning. That means that pretty much everything we do while we're awake is a response to one of those drives, but we don't know it. Death means that we will lose everything we know. It's the ultimate loss, and we're powerless against it. But death informs life. If we didn't have a finite timeline, we wouldn't have a non-negotiable that would force us into freedom. But instead of seeing death this way, we completely miss its teaching. We're super creative, and we come up with ways to pretend it doesn't exist and ways to earn our get-out-of-death-free card. Trying to fill a need without actually knowing what that need is makes no sense, but we do it all the time. To figure out what your real need is, just stop and ask. The answer is there in one of those 3 drives. You'll get better at understanding what you really need, at meeting that need, and then you'll be full. The alternative is to keep feeling uncomfortable and to keep reaching blindly for something to numb your discomfort, and we all have our drug of choice. We also need to realize that some needs are not going to be filled, so we can just watch them. It won't kill us. We don't know what we need because our sense of self is built on a manufactured reflection. We constantly look for proof that we exist, and then, when there is no one around to reflect back to us, we keep reassuring ourselves that we exist by talking to ourselves in our head. You know how as soon as a flight lands, everyone checks their phones for texts and emails? They're looking for proof that while they were out of network, they were not forgotten or erased. They need proof that they still exist. It seems so obvious, but nobody ever told us to stop and look, to ask ourselves what we need, to look for the answer to the question, what do I need inside? When you understand why you do things, that is the beginning of freedom. And you can ask why about everything. So let's practice asking why. Why are you here? What made you sign up to be here in this room today? Do you know? Yeah? Do you know what underlying need drove you to come? Just notice. The second part is asking, what am I feeling? What am I feeling is a whole new world for us, as Rosalind spoke about earlier. In his short story, A Painful Case, James Joyce tells the reader that the hero of the story, Mr. Duffy, lived at a little distance from his body, regarding his own acts with doubtful side glances. Like Mr. Duffy, most of us live disconnected from our bodies. At best, we live from the neck up. So let's practice that as well, together. Don't worry, we're going to stay in the shallows. I'm not going to take you in deep water. We're going to start by putting everything that you have in your hands on the table in front of you, please. Thank you. If you can, please put both feet on the ground. Sit up nice and straight. Rest your back on the back seat. And rest your hands on your lap. Release your belly so that your belly forms a Buddha belly and rests on your thighs. Let your fingers be soft. Let your shoulders drop down. Bring space between the top and the bottom teeth. And unhook your tongue from the top of your mouth. Bring a little Mona Lisa smile to your lips, and if you're comfortable, close your eyes. Together, we're going to inhale through the nose and exhale through the mouth. From this place, go into your body and notice what you find. Come back and open your eyes. What did you notice? Most of the time, the first time people do that is they notice they're really, really tired. Because in our culture, we are trained to ignore biological needs like sleep and hunger, and sleep is not honored. And guess what? If you're tired, what you really need to do is sleep. There's no way that you can cheat the body out of what it needs. We're conditioned to ignore our body's needs only because we haven't realized that the body gets the last word always. Beyond the biological needs lie the world of emotion. Have you noticed that until you could differentiate between a sparrow and an egret, a heron and a finch, they were all just birds, maybe big birds or small birds? Or until you knew the difference between an ash and a maple, a willow or a poplar, they were just all trees? That's because when we don't have the language to describe something, there's just noise, there's no signal, and we are emotionally illiterate. I have a friend whose husband completely works around this by telling her, "You hurt my feeling." We need to recognize that we're feeling something, and then we need to be able to identify what it is. Then we can hopefully take smart action or not act, depending on the situation. So what are emotions? We're talking a lot about emotions today. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio defines emotions as action requiring neurological programs. Emotions happen as a result of our interaction with the environment, and they occur in different intensities. Even though our culture is obsessed with being happy all the time, all emotions are equally valuable, including anger and jealousy, for example, because they all arise for a reason. In an emotionally literate person, emotions arise, are assessed and addressed, and then they go away until they get triggered by new stimulus. Let's take anger, for example, and anger is an emotion that nice people are not supposed to have. Anger arises to address challenges to your position or boundaries, and anger tells you that your task is to restore your sense of self and your interpersonal boundaries without violating the boundaries of others. So think of healthy anger as an honorable sentry. The internal questions you ask when anger arises are what must be protected and what must be restored. Let's practice with anger. Think back to a recent situation when you got angry. Not rage, just angry enough to know that you were angry. With your partner, your child, your coworker, or the airline, I don't know, find something. How was your position threatened? And who threatened your position? What needed to be restored? Did you restore what needed to be restored? Can you see how that works? When anger arises, it also brings with it the energy you need to go out and fix what needs to be fixed. An excellent resource for emotional literacy is Carla McLaren's work, which is available for free on her website. It's thelanguageofemotions.com. I think this stuff should be taught in schools. Please check it out. It's fantastic. So once you know what you're feeling and are able to respond to your feelings, you can't be manipulated because you know your truth. You know where you stand. You don't need someone else to tell you. Together, knowing why you're doing and how you're feeling give you freedom. Freedom during and freedom from. Unpleasant things are still going to happen in your life. It's part of being human. But you will be free to choose your reaction from a place of clarity. You get to choose what comes into your body, your mind, and your home. You become less sensitive to cultural pressure, to consuming religion and drama. There is no delusion that someone else knows better than you what you must do. Yes, you can absolutely learn from others, but you stop abdicating responsibility for your well-being. Until you become free, you seek your identity outside of yourself. You look for symbols you can attach to yourself so you and others know who you are. You seek comfort and protection. Becoming free is a process. More and more things just fall away effortlessly. It's not a question of giving things up. It's a process of realizing what really matters. So how do you know if it's happening? The moment you become free, it simply becomes uncomfortable to encroach on other people. You find that you naturally abide by the two laws of a free society, always do what you said you would do and never encroach on someone else's property. And you become aware of externalized costs, and you consider them when making decisions. And that is how liberty propagates and how a free society is built, from the bottom up, not from the top down. Toni Morrison said in an interview, "I tell my students, when you get these jobs that you've been so brilliantly trained for, just remember that your real job is that if you're free, you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else." It's a great quote, and we understand what Toni was implying. The thing is, you can only really free yourself, just like no one else can do the work for you. You have to be willing to stop and feel, to stop and ask why, and see reality as it is. When you free yourself, when you take responsibility for figuring out what your needs are and how to meet them in a healthy way, you drop the illusion that other people are the ore from which you will mine your well-being. The only thing you can do to free anyone else, then, is to live your life in a way that does not enslave others. Let the other person be who they are, without the threat of you leaving, and don't control their behavior to make yourself feel more comfortable. It starts close in with your partner and your children and spreads from there. Behavior control is recognized by the if-then relationship. If you do this, then I will do that. If you give me what I want, then I will be nice to you. Like Dr. Phil would say, and how is that working for you? The irony here is that neither of you is free. Threats are violence, and the other party has you hostage. That doesn't mean that you let your child grow into a brat and that you become a doormat. It means that you ask for what you need in a civilized manner. And if your needs are not being met in a gracious, generous way, you recognize you have a problem on your hand, and then you deal with it. It also doesn't mean that you're no longer responsible for anyone else. You use common sense. So of course you stop the 3-year-old from running into the road, and of course you take your addicted friend to rehab, because they both are, and hopefully only temporarily, incapable of making their own wise decisions. But you do it for the minimum amount of time, and then you get out of the way. You are your brother's keeper, but the ultimate goal is individual freedom. Keep your brother safe, only until he can do it himself. Once you realize what you feel, once you understand why you do, you're on the way towards freedom. You become more immune to external manipulation and a better steward of your biology. It's really that simple and that easy. You start right where you are. You don't need to buy anything or go anywhere. There is nothing you really have to do. You just have to notice. That's called waking up. And I have one last story for you. A Zen master asked his disciple to send him faithful accounts of his spiritual progress. In the first month, the student wrote, "I feel an expansion of consciousness and experience oneness with the universe." The master glanced at the note and threw it away. The following month, this is what the student had to say. "I finally discovered that the divine is present in all things." The master seemed disappointed. In his third letter, the disciple enthusiastically explained, "The mystery of the one and the many has been revealed to my wandering gaze." The master yawned. The next letter said, "No one is born, no one lives, and no one dies, because the self is not." The master threw his hands in despair. After that, a month passed by, then 2, then 5, then a whole year. The master thought it was time to remind his disciple of his duty to keep him informed of his spiritual progress. The disciple wrote back, "I am simply living my life. And as for my spiritual practice, who cares what you think?" When the master read that, he cried. He got it at last. That is freedom. Thank you.